December 28th, 4 p.m., 4:08 p.m. I apologize. Going live with Coach Saif from Dalton State. Men's soccer here momentarily, and women's soccer actually. I'm going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff, so hopefully you're staying tuned. We're going to have Coach Saif from Dalton State in here momentarily, college coach. So if you want to know anything about the college recruiting process, you are going to want to stay into the live and get some information. So he'll be on momentarily. Again, it'll be Coach Saif. I'll put his information here right now. Coach Saif from Dalton State. So he's a Dalton State men's and women's coach. 1 second. Men's soccer. Hold on, I'm just trying to make sure this is clear for y'all. Here you go. Boom. So we're going to have Coach Saif on momentarily. Give me 1 second, make sure I'm putting that. He'll be here any second, and we'll be going through a whole bunch of things. So if you have questions that you would want a college coach to answer for you or your child or whatever, maybe it's your child that has a question, feel free to leave it in the chat. We'll try and get to it. We'll ask the question. Michelle, that's freaking awesome. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that his cousin played at Dalton. That's awesome. Was it recent or is it relatively new? Or older, I guess. So yeah, if you got any questions for Coach Saif when he pops in here, he'll be here in a second. I told him 4:10, so I just gave him 2-minute head starts, or I guess a minute now at this point. But he'll be here in a second to rock this out. If you have any questions, put them here. I got a list of stuff that we're going to talk about. But he just got in right now, so let me add him. If you have any questions in particular about college recruiting, how do I? There should just be a button that I can just press to invite. Arsenal are definitely playing. That is definitely true. They are playing. But what's more important, the education piece or watching Arsenal? I don't know. There he is.
Hey.
The man, the myth, the legend. What's on, bro? Everything good?
I'm good. How are you?
Just another day in paradise, man. Another day in the dream. Just making it happen. How's the off season treating you?
Yeah, it's fine. Trying to catch up on some things around the house that need to get done, and
sure.
All that stuff, and doing some recruiting.
Right.
And, some planning for next.
I gotta say, I love that Tyrion reposter in the back. That's awesome.
He's the man.
He's definitely the man. But since you just talked about recruiting, somebody actually asked me this question because they knew I was going to talk to you, and they were like, what does a college coach look for if you've never talked to them from a recruiting perspective? And what do you need to do? The question really was, what does a player need to do on a field to stand out for you? So if you were just walking by a field, you've never recruited this kid in your life, what would this kid need to do to stand out for you? Or what would he need to do to stand out to catch your attention if you're just walking by?
Well, if I was just walking by, I mean, that's a little bit more difficult. You try and target the fish that you're trying to catch rather than just throwing anything out there. But yeah, I think if you're just walking by, you're looking for people that, or the way that maybe they can stand out. I think personality is really important.
Mm-hmm.
I think people that work hard and that, kind of do everything at the highest level when they're looking to tackle, when they're looking to go up and win headers, when they're in transition.
Right.
I always notice about a player is, do they run, and like how much do they run? How assertive are they in the things that they do? So they don't got to be somebody necessarily. I think a lot of people think like, hey, when I get the ball, that's kind of my moment to make something happen. And I mean, there's only one ball, so people's attention will be drawn to the ball. But that said, there is only one ball,
right?
And there's two people on the pitch. So if you're relying on the ball to be at your feet for when you're gonna grab someone's attention, how many touches do you get in a game, and how many of those are opportunities where you can make yourself obvious? I think you got to find other ways. And for me, that's certainly what I'm looking for, because also, I think statistically the same thing would apply. Like how many times do I see the player, even that I'm looking at, even if I pick one that I'm looking at, how many times am I going to get to see that player on the ball?
Right.
It's going to be a amount of time. So like most of what I'm going to be evaluating then is going to be what they're doing away from the ball. So, it's one of those things that I just think that we have backwards, and I think that it's for kids to like think about what they're doing away from the ball. And for me, like that's always a good one. Like how much do they run and how assertive are they to do certain things, like put in a challenge for when they transition, or they go for a header, or do they command things with their voice? Do they encourage their teammates? Do they demand more of their teammates? Stuff like that.
Okay, that's fair. And then on that note, in terms of the actual recruiting process, like how often or how many times do you, as the head coach, actually look at a player before that you actually offer them? So you talked before last time about the webinar or the Zoom call. How many times do you actually, yourself, I'm not even talking about staff, but you go out and actually look at a player before you offer?
So, I mean, it depends. Everything varies, but I think what's probably typical is for us to see obviously like a highlight video after we've received some type of contact. So we might watch a highlight. You might watch the highlight like 3 times. If you like it, you request a full game. If you watch maybe like 20 minutes of the full game and that looks pretty good, you watch the entire full game. And if you're going to go down the road of offering, by the time I've offered, I've probably watched like 3 full games if I can.
Wow.
I mean, it just depends on what type of offer we're talking about. I mean, it's important that you get these things right. So
right.
I'm watching quite a few full games at that point amongst me and my staff, and then me personally. Yeah, if I think I'm gonna actually offer this kid, and I think that they're the right fit, I've got to know for sure. And then we like them to come in if they can. So everybody that we can get in to our environment to come and train, we want them to come and train as well. And when they come and train, we try and get them to train like 2 days, if we can, so we can see them live in our environment. And that's something that we can do in the NAIA. There's more flexibility with that than there is in the NCAA. We can actually have them come in and train with our players in a training session a couple of times.
I'm glad you said that, because some people would say, well, the NCAA says you can't do that. But yeah, Coach Saif coaches at the NAIA level. So can you explain how that works? Because some people probably don't know in terms of like players being able to train in your environment. So can you kind of highlight how that works? And I'm assuming that means it's legal in the NAIA.
Yeah, totally legal. And yeah, if they come on an official visit, they'll get a tour. They'll get to sit down and meet with me. They'll get to meet with the players before training and kind of hang out with them and maybe go to lunch with them. They'll get to go to a training session and then usually meet with me after. So yeah, they kind of get the full experience. And again, that just allows us and them to try and make an informed decision and get to know each other really well.
That definitely makes a difference because, for most places at the NCAA, at least D2 you can, D1, and can you do it in D3? I know D1 you can't. Do they allow you to train with the team in D3?
I don't know about Division 3.
I don't know either. So let's move on to this next question, and I would like to get your opinion on this because this is stuff that I've seen. I've talked to a couple of players recently that have, gone on from youth to college, and I don't know what your thoughts are, but what I'm getting from this is more and more youth players that go from youth soccer into college seem to be struggling more to make the impact that they thought they were going to make. Do you share that same feeling or experience, and why is that if it's the case?
I think it's really difficult. It's really difficult to come from the youth game and make an impact immediately at the college level. The games are different. The games are different. They're not the same. So I think that what helps to kind of exacerbate that issue of not being able to make that jump and make that leap in the impact is maybe not choosing the right fit as well. So like, is the game different from college to club and high school? Sure. There's going to be a difference in the pace of play and the physicality, and many times the level as well. So yeah, those things are going to vary. But then if you don't pick the right environment for yourself, like you're creating the gap for yourself. So when people are thinking about recruiting and you're a student athlete and you're trying to find the right fit for you, like it's really important that you get that right, because you might be putting yourself into an environment where like you're already behind the 8 ball in terms of having to make this gap smaller. But like if you pick the wrong place, you're making the gap a little bit bigger for yourself, which can take you longer to make the impact that you want to make. So getting the right fit, maybe if you can get the right fit, then the gap is smaller before you can make an impact and more reasonable. If you really nail the right fit and you're the right player at the right time, the gap is really small, and like you can start to make that impact more immediately, and contribute sooner than later.
Fair enough. That's a fair point. I think what you just said in terms of players or student athletes picking the right school is so important, because I think a lot of people, to your point, will go to a school just because they got an offer because they want to play, versus finding a school that's probably a better fit overall for them. Like I remember I was talking, I don't know who I spoke to, but when I was going through the process when I was younger, like make sure you would go to that school if you weren't a student athlete. If you were just a student, would you go to the school? And I think that's something that I agree with. If you wouldn't go to the school, to your point, it might not be the best fit for you athletically, just because you might not be happy with the environment or the schooling or whatever the structure is. So I think that's important. Now, I want to ask you this. You talked about last time. You have 30 players on your team typically, correct?
Roughly.
Roughly 30. Okay, so since you're in the NAIA, what is the oldest player on your team?
I think the oldest player on our team is probably 24.
24. So again, I think that just adds value to people to understand that this is not the youth game anymore. You're playing against grown men, because Josh was probably your oldest guy, no, at the time?
I don't know that Josh. No, I think Josh is 22, maybe.
Okay. But even then, he's still, an athletic beast. But then
Oh, yeah.
I want to ask you this. So since you can have a range of players, age-wise, when I was at St. Leo as a player, there was 36 players on our roster, and Keith basically knew the probably 22-ish that were always going to play, and then there was the rest, say 14 that probably were never going to play or very minimal game time. Is that something that's pretty typical with college? Or is it, at least in your environment, is it more flexible in terms of like somebody can always earn their spot, or do you kind of know what your main group of players are?
I think it's probably when it's the most malleable is in preseason. That's when you can maybe see the most moving back and forth between like what your 11 could look like to maybe the 8 people that might make a roster versus the 8 that aren't in a roster. I think once you start to get past preseason, it's still somewhat malleable. But again, I think from preseason to like the end of the season, like the further you move away from preseason, I think the more set things become, because the more time that you have to communicate your expectations, and then the more time the players have to either meet those expectations or not, like that's what's going to make the difference on who plays and who doesn't. Yeah, I definitely think by the time you get halfway through the season, like you've got a really solid idea of like what your best 11 is, what are your best guys off the bench, where do they come in, when they come in, even the substitution patterns that you might make at that time. As you start to get closer to postseason, like there's some guys that are on the edge, and you might be curious if you're fortunate, if you're in a situation where you're fortunate, where you're going to be in the postseason because of the work that you've done to the point and the regular season, then yeah, maybe you start to like tinker a little bit and see like, can some of those guys really help you if you need them in a playoff situation. So that's kind of the position that we've been in. We've been really fortunate to get to the end of the regular season, knowing that we have done enough to position ourselves for a postseason run. So then it's like, okay, that, like you said, if you say you got like 18 guys, 11, you got your best 11, you got 7 guys that are on the roster that will come off the bench, and that's if you're fortunate, I think. All right, now what about 19 to 22? They're all on the edge. They're always like fighting to get in, et cetera, et cetera. They're floating in and out of the team. Can you rely on them? And then even at 12 to 18, like who's the most reliable? Obviously, like 12 to 15, you would say are like your really reliable guys. Are 16, 17, and 18 reliable enough to play in a conference tournament or in a national tournament? Those are some of the questions that I think you have to have answers to those questions by the time you get to postseason. But I do, to answer the original question, I think it's most malleable at the beginning of the season, and then by the time the coach has had a chance to communicate expectations, you will have had some time to reach those expectations or fall from those expectations, and then things get set.
Okay, so you talked about preseason being the most malleable. So can you kind of explain what your preseason looks like for people that don't know what a college preseason is or evaluates?
Oh, man.
Don't have to go so in depth, but can you kind of highlight like an overview of what, they come in 3 weeks before school starts, you have X number of games, this is the number of trainings they're going to do, just kind of an outline, because I don't think people get it. And I'll explain why.
Yeah, it's probably 3 weeks before your first game, roughly, your first regular season game. And we like to have 1 or 2 preseason games. We don't usually play 3. The season's really long, and we bring them a little bit earlier than most people. So some people will bring them only 2 weeks ahead of time. We bring them 3. And yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of foundational work, a lot of groundwork of how we want to play, who we are, what our culture's about, what do we want to do with the ball, what do we want to do without the ball, and then obviously, like you said, when it came to the last question about like figuring out the roster, we're trying to figure out now that we're communicating all these things, like who's able to catch those things as quickly as possible, and then you start to put the pieces together. But yeah, preseason's really important, man. It's a great time as well, I think, because it's exciting. The team is forming, and there's a lot of buzz around like what the season can be like, what the expectations are, and everybody kind of gets excited about, you spent the summer preparing, and now you get to come in and try to execute those things. But preseason is also as fun as it is. It's a bit of a grind too because there's a lot that's going all the time.
Right. So you mentioned it a little bit, but can you expand on it? You talked about like how you want to play on offense and defense. So one of the things that I think people struggle with, especially from youth, from my experience, is one, we don't really have a preseason. So preseason doesn't even exist. Kids start soccer, even in the MLS Next programs, they're going to start at August 10th, and then they're going to have their first tournament or first game a week and a half later. But I mean, official game, I'm not even talking like friendly or something. I mean, we're full flow. So I think players struggle from the youth game to make that adjustment because now they're going into something that's completely new. And then the other side, really where I want to go with this next is the tactical piece that you kind of highlighted. You don't have to give like how your team plays, but how much tactical prep and work do you guys do, even if it's in preseason or after preseason, like between games? Can you kind of expand on that? Because I don't think people really get like what it looks like or what you guys do on a daily basis.
That's a great question. There's a lot of tactical work, and I agree that, and of course it depends on your environment. In my environment, there's a lot of tactical work, and I think in the top teams, I think there's a lot of tactical work because the expectations are like, this is how we're going to play.
Right.
People need to do those things. So I have to say that it's been a little bit underwhelming sometimes, the lack of tactical knowledge that players will have when they come in, simply because they're not being given tactical knowledge. So they're just like, if they're not given that knowledge, then like it's hard. We talked about that gap earlier. So like if you wanted to layer blocks on that gap, like physical preparedness would be a block, like technical preparedness would be a block, tactical preparedness would be a block, your attitude and your disposition towards things would be a block. The right fit would be another block. See, I'm like getting out of the camera. I can't even keep my hands on the camera. Like the gap is so big now, so you need to remove those things. So like tactically speaking, yeah, we're playing against the best teams in the country. We're not going to win if we don't have a plan. We're not going to compete if we don't have a plan.
Right.
Just roll out there and say your plan is going to be like, we've got 7 studs and they've only got 4. The skill gap in college is much, much, much tighter. There's so much more parity, skill from one player to another. So yeah, your best 11, could it be better than somebody else's 11? Yeah. How much better? I mean, it's not going to be that much better. People might look at a score line and think, well, they got smashed 5-0, so they're just so much better. Maybe their plan was better. Maybe their plan was significantly better, and the execution of the plan was significantly better because the understanding of the tactics was, better for the team, and then they were able to execute it. Doesn't necessarily mean that they were just better players. And I do think that that's something I have to say that, like, a lot of players will just think it's like, again, we talked about earlier about what they do with the ball. Like, one small part of what you do on the pitch is what you do with the ball at your feet. So
Right.
Your kind of mentality and identity as a player is wrapped up in like, what am I doing when I have the ball? Yeah, then like that takes away from the tactics. They think that that's the time they're supposed to be great. It's when they have the ball, and it's like that's not what tactics are. So for us, and I have to say again, for us, there's a lot of tactical work. There's a lot of tactical work, and it's a big adjustment. It's probably one of the bigger adjustments that I've heard from players when I speak to them in exit meetings and stuff like that. Or even during the season, like, kids that transfer from other programs or something. What are some of the differences here in the tactics? Like the detail that we go into is always one of those things that's on the top, like one or two or three things on the list. That and the culture.
So, highlighting the tactical piece, how important, or I guess I should say, do you spend more time teaching the offensive side tactics or defense, and why?
Well, I try and give a pretty good balance, but it's harder to score than it is to stop people from scoring. So I think the challenge is in possession. Like it's harder to break people down than it is for someone to be able to line themselves in two banks of four, and then two, and playing a 4-4-2 and just keep things tight, shift, plug the passing lanes and that go on the counter or something.
Right.
So that's a lot easier. It's obviously completely respectable, but it's a lot easier to teach than it is to, all right, we're going to get expansive. We're going to connect the dots. We're going to try and find the opponent's weak side. Once we do that, we'll create isolation. Then we get like some type, maybe 2 or 3 varied runs, and then the ball comes in, and then we score. So I think that we dedicate very similar amounts of time, but there's usually an edge, maybe in difficulty in scoring goals. But I think part of the reason why we're so successful and have been so successful in the program is because we dedicate a lot of time to how we defend. We're very intentional in how we defend, whether we're pressing or we're not. Everything's very detailed, everything's very specific, and it has to get done right.
Right. And
we will try it until basically it gets done right. And when we feel like it's gotten done right, then we'll move to the other side of the ball. But at the end of the day, it's not basketball, so we're not going to outscore our opponents. That's not going to be our. We're not trying to win 5. We're happy to win 3-0, 1-0, 2-0, whatever to 0. Whatever, as long as there's a 0 on the scoreboard for them, then we're happy with that. So I think our main focus is like, can we keep a 0 on the scoreboard? And then obviously we'll go and find the goals that we need.
So correct me if I'm wrong, because this is my assumption. Once you guys kind of set your game plan for defense, how you guys are going to defend, you probably don't have to spend too much time correcting behavior, because probably in preseason you say, hey, this is how we're going to defend. You probably do a couple of weeks of that, and then the overall game plan is set in terms of how you're overall going to defend. I'm assuming you might change it a little bit based on who you're playing, but that's probably why it's easier from a defensive side to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to work on this for 2 weeks, and then you got to work more time on the opponent and how they set up, and you have to try and break them down. Is that a fair statement to say?
I mean, it's pretty fair. I think that for example, I don't think it's any secret to anybody that we play that we like to press. So whenever we feel like we've gotten really good at pressing, by the way, by the time we're halfway through the season, like everybody has a pretty good idea of how we want to press and what the triggers are, what our cues are to do those things, the things that we're looking for, and then the football language, if you like, has been kind of established.
Right.
I think that it's we're more efficient in training. We're more efficient in training by that time, because it's like, hey, people know if I say, hey, we're gonna press in this way for this reason, it's kind of like, okay, got it. And then we go and execute it in training, and then we can move on. So I do think that there's a lot to be said about that. There's obviously nuances based on the opponent that we might layer in here or there. But yeah, the attacking side it's without doubt more challenging.
Okay, so let me ask you this as well, because you talked about the team and you having a plan that you want the players to follow. So what would happen if a player did not follow the plan set in place and you put them on the field? So let's say they're playing right back and you tell them whatever it is, keep the lines tight or whatever. You're winning 1-0 hard game, and the kid just starts bombing forward. So he's just completely ignoring the instruction that you put in or gave him before the game or before he entered the game. What would your reaction be, and how would you handle that?
Well, my first reaction is to try and get their attention and tell them to correct whatever it is that they did, and remind them to stick to the plan. And then usually they'll get like another rep. Usually.
Usually, there you go.
Usually, so not always. It just depends. It depends on like
what the error is.
I think so, and it depends on the context of the game. It depends on the context of the conversation, like, sometimes they get time to warm up. Sometimes they get time to warm up where they have got 5 minutes to warm up because they know, hey, I'm going to put you in the game. And while they're warming up, I get to go down there toward the end of their warm up, bring them over. The coach will bring them over and bring them over to me, and I'll say, hey, remember, they know what the game plan is, but then I might remind them specifically their individual role and then set them out there. Now, if I do that, and literally the first thing that they do is go opposite to that, it depends. Do I have to be ready to go in right now? If I have someone else ready to go in right now, they might just have to come out, It depends on the context of the game. If we're winning 3-0, probably not. Like, then it's maybe a reminder, right, of like, hey, this is what the plan is. This is what you're supposed to be doing. You need to stick to it. And, they might be like, yeah, my bad, coach. I got excited or whatever. Hey, no problem. Let's keep going, but I need you to grow here, and I need you to prove to me that you can be reliable and that you can execute a plan. So I think that's kind of the, generally speaking, what we would like. But yeah, if it's like 1-0 and things are tight and someone goes in and does something that's incredibly dangerous and almost costs us a goal.
Bye.
Yeah, the likelihood of what's going to happen is like, hey, the guy that I just took off, which is probably why he's on the field because I trust him to execute more, like that person's back on the pitch.
Well, so the reason why I asked that question, it's kind of funny because when we get to youth soccer, this is my personal opinion. I feel like a lot of organizations don't have to try and actually teach the tactical side that we were talking about, how like you feel like kids struggle to make that adjustment. And it's because, parents are paying for their kids to play soccer, so if the parents don't like what they see, they'll pull their kid. And where I'm going with this is, what this translates to me is the kids aren't learning the tactical side, and then they think that they can do whatever they want on the field. So when they go to your environment, you've brought them in, and now you're telling them, hey, you need to follow my plan. It's this or the highway, essentially. I think you're being nice about it, but I don't think people really understand, like, at that level, at your level and higher, so pro level, you're not getting away with doing what you want. You're either following the plan or you're going to have a consequence.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Like, you'd have to be so extraordinarily talented and not follow the plan and still be effective. And a lot of players think this is like a slight to them. Like, it's not a slight to the individual. It's a game where 11 people are playing against 11 people.
Right.
So, yeah, if it were, again, like people are, well, in basketball, you don't have to do that because of blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, yeah, basketball is 5v5. Yep. So, the individual can have more of an impact. In doubles tennis, maybe the individual can have more of an impact. But this is not what we're playing, right? So even in 3v3 soccer, you might see some, one particular player just like they get the ball and they get isolated and they just destroy a 3v3 match. I'm sure even in futsal, it's possible where you might have like 5v5 and like, your futsal player, if you have one really special, dynamic, technical player, can make some things happen out of nowhere.
Right.
The 11, man, the pitch, it's 120 yards long and 75 yards wide. And there's 21 other people out there. How good do you have to be to overcome those situations? Yeah, you got to be messy.
Right.
You want to pick up the ball, in midfield. Everybody knows you're left-footed, and it doesn't matter. You can still go and do what he wants to do. So people can say, like, well, that's not fair because there's LeBron and Kobe and Messi and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, okay, well, it's Kobe and Messi. Fair enough. If I had them on my team, then fair enough. Like, do whatever you want. But that's just not the reality for the rest of us. But again, people I think I think players sometimes take too much offense to that. It's an 11v11 game. The game doesn't lend itself to that type of thinking. It lends itself to a group of 11 people that are committed and willing to do what is necessary to execute a plan. And if the plan is good and the execution of the plan is good, then you win. And if the plan isn't good or the execution isn't good, then you usually don't.
That's funny. Yeah, because, that's one of the biggest things that we see on a day-to-day basis, even if it's not within our own program. Like, we just go out and watch games and you can see, like, I'll put it to you this way. I guess I'll ask this question and explain why. So at the college level, the teams that you play against, do a lot of them still use, like, and long ball method is not the right word to use, but like in youth soccer, we call it kickball. Kids are just aimlessly, because they're being told to kick it, to boot it, or send it. I'm assuming that that doesn't happen very often at your level, if at all. And if it does, or I mean, I guess I would probably say more teams at your level probably play longer ball, which might be more direct, but that doesn't mean they're aimlessly kicking it. They're probably trying to play it to a target 9. But is that stuff that you see in college, or is it just more direct play and building from the back, using tactics, or what is the style of play that's typical in college?
Well, I mean, it's completely variable, but what I will say is that I would say that it's usually intentional. Like it's usually intentional. So even if a team is direct, like they've got an idea of how they want to be direct for a specific reason, and then a lot of times as well, like again, we're talking about the top teams especially, teams that play on the floor, like they've got a very methodical way that they want to play and they want to break through lines and get into the final third. So I do think that there is an intentional for the top teams, like you can see an intentional pattern or plan of how they want to do things. And I think if you watch a game, and I try and do that when I'm trying to, because I'm a national rater for the NAI as well, for the top 25 coaches poll. So like when I'm watching a team and I'm trying to evaluate if they're top 25 team or maybe just outside the top 25 in receiving votes, or maybe they're not a receiving votes team either. A lot of times I'm watching to see, well, is there like a coherent pattern or plan that I can get from watching this game? So there's lots of good players out there. Do they have good players? That's a part of it. But like we just talked about, it's an 11-person game, right? So what type of plan is there? Do they have a plan with the ball and without the ball? And I think that that's what you'll find in the top teams. The top teams usually have a very clear plan of what they want to do with the ball and what they want to do without the ball. And then the teams that maybe float, in the could be great type of area, sometimes they either have really good plans and the players are maybe not quite as good, or the execution isn't quite as good, or the players are really good, but maybe there's really no plan. But I think in the top teams, you'll find a lot of times that they're pretty intentional about the way that they go about it.
Well, and it's interesting you use that word intentional, because with youth soccer, I can tell you, man, that even at MLS Next, not every team, but there's a lot of teams that you can tell don't really have a plan. They're just putting kids on the field to play, and they're being, that's why I use the word kick it, boot it, and send it, because it's a mess. And I think that's why, to your point, what you mentioned earlier, we're seeing more and more kids struggle to make the impact and even get to college. So on that note, from your perspective, are more and more schools or coaches recruiting international? And if so, why or why not?
I think that the top schools are, and the schools trying to be top schools are definitely recruiting international, for all the reasons that you can imagine, and ultimately what it comes down to is preparedness, like their level of preparedness in the four aspects, if you will, of a player is just oftentimes better. It just depends, but that technically, tactically, psychologically, and physically, like. If you can find a player that's more prepared in those areas, then they're going to play. So that's just how it is. But I think that that's definitely a trend that you see in top teams. Like there's a lot of internationals, and where are they coming from, how old they are, what type of experience they have, and it's going to tie back directly to that level of preparedness. You've got to be prepared. You've got to be prepared, and I think that is a mistake that players make in the youth game, is that they'll think that they're prepared. It's not possible for me, if I could give an analogy, if I wanted to learn how to fly planes, and I was, let's say, a trainee in flying planes, I can't say that my level, what I imagine to be a level of preparedness as a trainee pilot, is the same level of preparedness as a pilot who's not a trainee and has been flying professionally for 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. I can't comprehend that level of preparedness. So what do I need? I need him to tell me, or teach me, or instruct me, or in this case, coach me, to tell me what the level of preparedness really looks like. What is it? What type of preparedness do I really need to be able to be a top tier pilot? if I'm going to use my own level of preparedness or what I think that is, I've set up myself to fail at the first hurdle. My idea is not what is appropriate. I need someone who understands what the level is and to tell me what it is. And there are lots of youth coaches out there that have either played at really high levels or played, let's just say, played at the levels that those kids want to play at. And I think a lot of them are willing to give that information. Are kids willing to hear it? I don't know. A lot of the I've met a lot of good club coaches. So I've met some that I don't have as much affinity for, but I have met some. And by the way, I mean a lot of these are like not what like maybe the country would consider like the top tier, this coaching at this level or that level. I'm talking about like coaches that know the game, that care, that are coaching. A ton of them in Florida. I know a ton in Florida. They're coaching in whatever league, and like they know what they're doing. I just got done doing my B license, and I had coaches in my two of the coaches that were in my instructor group are from Florida, and they're both from the Miami area. And like, I mean, both of them know the game. They know the game. They know what they're talking about. And the benefit of those kids, if they'll listen to them, they will benefit. Like they don't need they don't need some big name or badge behind them to say this and that. People know the game. Do they know everything? No. But do they know enough to give them a level of preparedness that helps them to be more prepared than they are? Yeah, for sure.
Right.
They're older. They're more experienced. So take what you can get from people. Learn from people. Listen to people. It's free advice. How much, like, we're having to pay to get coaching licenses. You have to pay to buy books. You have to pay to get these to some of these lectures. If you want to go to some of these conferences, that thousands of dollars to go to these conferences and stuff. And you've got people around you in your life and in your community that have some level of experience that a lot of times are just willing to give it to you for free. I mean, it's one of the things that I say about church all the time. I tell young people about going to church. I'm like, ask the people at church that are older than you. Ask them questions. It's just free. It's free advice. Like, take the advice that you can get. Is everybody going to know everything? Of course not, but nobody does.
Right.
Why not just get what you can from them and try and better yourself? But that is a mindset, a growth mindset. That, yeah, it's not. I mean, like that needs to be developed. Like, we need to be cultivating that in our kids nowadays. And I think that if people do, then their kids will be the beneficiary of learning something from every coach that they have, and from some coaches maybe more than others.
Right. Well, and I think to highlight your point is you can always get 1% better. And what I'm seeing, because of social media and the impact, the implications of impact with that, with TikTok and stuff, kids are spending too much time on their phone and they're not receptive to more learning opportunities than maybe from my generation, your generation. But on that note, I want to get your opinion on, like, when you're in a game and you're going to make a substitution, when and why do you do that?
A variety of reasons. I don't want to give kind of my I don't want to give all of my plans in the way that I do things away, because I do think that there's an art there. I do think that there's an art in making substitutions and how you do those. But I mean, obviously, like, our people getting tired, that's probably the most obvious one. I'll give away this one that I think is really important. That we'll call a freebie, but matchups. Like, what do the matchups look like? So if you've been observing a game, and in our case, the half is 45 minutes. So if I've been observing the half for 20 minutes now, like, have I been able to identify any matchups that I think would be largely in our favor? So first, I might start with people on the pitch, maybe. So, like, if I move this winger over to the left or whatever, so he can have a better go or whatever. And I think a lot of coaches do that. Like, I do see coaches, like, maybe they take their right winger and they put him on the left because he's right-footed, he likes to cut inside, and maybe the fullback on the right's not as good or whatever. So maybe they do that. But what about your bench? So, like, if I've got a guy who's marauding down the left side and is maybe a left-footed left winger, and his big thing is service. Like he's really good at delivering a ball, delivers a great ball. And I've got a right back on the other team that has watched that kid do that for 25, 30 minutes now, and has been taken 1v1 like never, because this left winger I have is just, he loves to serve the ball. Well, who do I have on the bench that can go on the left and is a really, really, really good 1v1? Maybe I'll give him the last 10 minutes of the first half while that kid has been looking at a kid, not been taking 1v1 one time for 35 minutes. And now I put this other kid on, and for the last 10 minutes, this guy's just, every time he gets the ball, just driving right at him. And this dude's on his heels, and he's cold defending 1v1 because he's not done it for 35 minutes.
Right.
Every time my left winger's gotten the ball before, this kid just kind of like tries to take an angle to block across. It's a totally different style of defending and puts him, on his heels. So I think that matchups, not just what exists on the pitch, but like what exists on your bench and how you might be able to change the dynamic of a matchup, is, to me, that's really interesting, and I like to tinker with that.
So it's not just, because sometimes parents, I get this question, I should say I've had this question before. Parents will say, well, what kind of stuff are you making? And I'm going, well, we have an idea behind it. So you're not just throwing people against, you're not just saying, hey, I'm making this change for whatever, for shits and giggles. You actually have a plan as to why you're making a change. That's fair?
Yeah, I mean, I have a plan for everything that I do.
Right.
I try and have a plan for where I go to eat, but that's just the way that I live. I like to have a plan, but yeah, I mean, again, I can't speak for everybody else. I don't know how everybody else does it, but yeah, I mean, listen, you're spending I think what parents have to try and remember, and observers have to try and remember, because it's not always parents, sometimes it's just fans in the stands that think that they know this or that or whatever. You get a snapshot into these things. You can't judge the whole thing based on a snapshot. And people say, well, yeah, I can. Well, of course you can. It's a free country. You can do whatever you want. But imagine if, as a coach, so like you're a youth coach, and imagine if you made parenting judgments on the way someone parents based on the, 3 hours you get to spend with their kid a week. But you're not in their house. Right. You don't know all the parenting that parent's doing in their house, and all the hard work that they're doing, and all the things that they're going through. And it's like, right, you don't know you weren't at training all week. You don't know what we've been doing for 5-6 days out of this, or 5 days out of this training week. That's going to lead to day 6 on Saturday night when we play the game. Like, people have no idea, but they watch, and then they try, and they do. I mean, people come up with a lot of opinions based on, they don't even wait for the game to finish a lot of times. They don't even wait for halftime. After the first 10, 15 minutes of the game, a lot of observers will have an opinion on like how the game is going, and which is fine, but like where the team is getting it right or wrong or whatever. And it's like, they might be nailing it. You don't know what the plan is. Do you know what the plan is?
Right. Well, I'm glad you said that point, because I'll give you a perfect example. So one of the things we did with one of our older groups, you met some of the kids before, and we do something, we like to press a lot. But we had one game where we told the kids, we knew the opponent was going to be very good with the ball. We felt, this was about a year and a half ago. Mitchell and I felt like we weren't good enough to go press them. So we said, hey, we're going to be tight, play 2 lines of 4 or two nines. And when they bring the ball to half, that's when you're going to start triggering the press. But then the entire time, the parents are used to us pressing. So the entire time they're screaming at the kids, press, just go. And we're like, shut up, stop, like, let the kids know what to do. Stop talking. We're like, me and Mitch are yelling at the parents, like, shut up, stop talking, because we have a plan for this game. And I think it's so funny, because to your point, people will make judgments. Maybe it's atypical of what usually happens or whatever it is. And they're saying, we don't like what we see, and then they got to give their commentary right away. And it's like, just as long as the coach has an idea and structure, follow the plan. I don't think anybody's asking for a lot of that. So I just thought you'd find that pretty funny, because it's, you probably get that in your environment. You got spectators screaming and whatnot. Hey, do this, do that, and they don't know what your plan was and what the instruction was.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. I think that happens all the time. It happens. Yeah, it happens, and it's not helpful. And and to be fair, the fans, whether they're parents or not, that are like really genuine about wanting to support, because sometimes they get to know it, like maybe their kids will tell them or something, well, hey, we were trying to do this, and they're like, oh, okay, well that makes more sense. I think I think what could be fun for parents is to try and surmise like what the plan is, and maybe come to you like at the next training session and say, hey, I wonder, and not the whole plan, like maybe pick one thing. Hey, so were you guys waiting till they got to half field and then like triggering your press? Was that kind of your cue? And you're like, yeah, and they're like, okay, cool, yeah, I saw that. That was cool. Like I don't want to make it like a unique opportunity to observe and learn something and grow in some kind of way. I wonder if you have any more questions that they wanted to ask, because I know that at the very end I got a couple really good ones last time.
Yeah.
That
Hey
were
guys, if you got any questions, drop them in while you're in the chat. We'll answer them or we'll try to answer as they pop up. I still got a couple more left for Saif to discuss with, but please, if you got any questions, throw them out here, guys, so we can try to get them answered. Now, I would love to get your opinion on this, and that is, like, do you guys have an expectation from Dalton State, or at least your expectation of what nutrition should look like? Or are you just kind of like free flowing, you can do whatever you want, or do you guys have some sort of plan for the players?
for nutrition.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, especially as we kind of get to, I think there's some general kind of common sense guidelines.
I want to hear your common sense, because most parents don't get the common sense part.
Well,
I got a funny story for you too, so you'll laugh at this.
well, I mean, like, if the kid's drinking soda, a bunch of soda every day, like that. If the doctor doesn't think it's healthy, then like the coach probably isn't going to subscribe to it.
Right.
So, kind of follow the doctor's orders. But as you kind of get maybe into sports science and you try and get maybe closer to like competition, and you're thinking, so like the night before the game, for example, we're already asking them to have high carb, low fat dinner, and then like have something for breakfast, and then a high carb, low fat lunch before maybe the game. So doing that, obviously hydration. You want to be hydrated all the time, but you really need to be starting to hydrate properly 72 hours before competition, and then within the first 30 minutes after competition, we want them to get some bananas or some chocolate milk or something like that to refuel a little bit, put some of those carbohydrates and protein back in their body. So yeah, I mean, they're especially around competition, the couple days leading into, and then the day after competition is pretty like bang, bang, bang. Here's kind of what we're looking for, and we give them suggestions of what those things are. We don't just say, hey, high carb, low fat, and then
Sure.
go Google it. They can do, but like we'll tell them, hey, make sure you're having some, if you're having some rice, some whole, some wheat bread, some grilled chicken, you want some fish, you want some pasta. It depends too, like the digestion period, how much time do you have before the game?
Right.
So you don't want them eating pasta 2 hours before the game or 3 hours before the game. Usually we want them, if they're going to have pasta, we usually want them to have like 4 or 5 hours to digest that. So pasta the night before the game, we love that. Like pasta and grilled chicken, we like that a lot.
Right. So the reason why I asked you that question is because we had a tournament almost a year ago at this point, probably 9 months ago. We were out in Sarasota, and parents, we finished 2 games on Saturday. I mean, you probably remember how these tournaments work, but finished 2 games on Saturday. Parent decides to have a pizza party, soda party, goes until 11 o'clock at night. We have a game the next day at 8 a.m. And there was 15 kids on the team, and I think 7 of them showed up at least. They showed up at least 30 minutes late. 3 of them showed up. No joke. I wish I was making this up. 5 minutes before kickoff, and then parents couldn't understand why they lost the game. They couldn't understand why the kids couldn't perform, and then they started asking questions to the staff. Why did their kid not play? So I would love to get your take on how you would deal with players showing up late. Like, what is your maybe it's a rule or guideline if somebody shows up late, whether it's practice or a game, what happens?
I think that like the latest that maybe somebody has shown up, especially in recent years, to a training session is like maybe they make it like if training's at 2:30, we have them arrive at 2, and there have been occasions where people arrive at like 2:01, and if that happens, if that were to happen a couple times that week, because usually our leadership group sorts that out. Like they'll make sure that doesn't happen again. If it were to happen multiple times in a week, then maybe we're into something like push-ups or something like that. But we don't. And man, it's been a long time. It's been a lot of years since someone showed up like 20 minutes late to a session. I mean, they wouldn't even, you don't bother. Just don't even bother. Just go change and go do what you need to do, or go home, or just hey, if you want to stay around and shag balls or something for the session, that's great too.
Right.
And that's the game. Forget it. Like that's not even a thing. So yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I think people get confused. Like, it was so funny because I'm the director, so it wasn't my team, but 3 of the parents came up to me the next day asking, Kyle, I don't understand why the kids didn't play. And I'm like, well, what time did you guys arrive? They said 5 minutes before the game, and I said, you're confused as to why your kids played 5 minutes. I'm like, they shouldn't have even have played. You're lucky the coach even put them on the field. And these weren't little kids; these were 15-year-olds. So it's funny. The bar, it feels like to me, is dropping, but the bar at your level and probably most colleges is the same. And I think that's ironic, man. Like, even for our practice, I know it's a little bit different because you have people living on campus, but for our practices, let's say we start at 6 p.m. We probably don't have all the players there until 6:15, and it's a nightmare because it's like there's so many things that you want to get done that you're now delayed because you're now 15 minutes late waiting for kids to show up. So I love the fact that that's never an issue for you. And is that led by you guys, or like you said, is that led through the players, the whole discipline aspect?
Well, it's established by us, but we try and give the players autonomy to to own the environment. It's their environment.
Right.
We're trying to guide the environment. I think that's the ideal setup. The ideal setup is me being the guide in the environment, but the players are the ones that are actually executing and making the environment what it is. So we try and allow that to happen as much as possible. But it takes a coalition of people to get that done. So in your environment, like, you need the parents are important, man. Like, you need them on your team, and not in some kind of special way that, like, not in some kind of ridiculous way where they have access to everything or whatever. This is not the point. The point is that they want their kids to develop, right? And they have decided that you are the person to develop them. Well, then, like, a fundamental rule of that would be, like, if I have an hour to spend with you, but I was only able to spend 40 minutes of that hour with you, like, your development's going to suffer. I mean, this is not like a personal thing. It could venture into that, but I think that this is just a common sense thing where, like, statistically speaking, the more time I have to spend with you, if I'm the right person and you're the right person, like, the more developed you're going to be. And the more time I have to spend with you, the less, like, you're not going to be as developed as you should be. Like, it's just, so, are people late and this and that sometimes, and does life happen? Of course.
Yeah.
But I'd like to think that most coaches understand that life sometimes happens. It certainly can't be a consistent thing. And then the other thing is that, like, there's still, just because life happens doesn't mean that there aren't expectations that you have to hold your team to. Like, I don't get to just not come into work just because life happens, and then I get to expect, if I'm on an hourly wage, to still receive the same paycheck that I like that. There's still there's still a consequence to me being late. Now, I might not get fired because maybe I'm making however much money an hour, and my boss is like, all right, no worries, we got someone to cover your shift. We'll see you next week or whatever. But I'm not going to get paid for that shift that I didn't come in for. Or if I only come in to work 4 hours of a 6-hour shift, I'm not going to get paid for the 2 hours that I wasn't there. Like, it's just, I mean, we've got to try and, everybody has to try and be as reasonable as possible, and to try and do some damage limitation on these things. And again, I mean, we're all human beings, so I think most of us are pretty reasonable and willing to work. But we have to be reasonable and adjust our circumstances, or our understanding and our expectations to the circumstances. I can't expect you to make my kid better if he's not there for 60 minutes, if that's what you have to offer. I can expect you to make him 40 minutes better, maybe. Maybe. But even that is, I think, like you said, like if they're missing the first 20 minutes, like what were the foundational building blocks in the first 20 minutes that are going to help them to learn in these last 40 minutes? So I'm explaining it very simply, but it's really not. It's not that simple. It's more nuanced than that. But I think that I'm explaining like a baseline of expectations.
Right. No, it's interesting because again, like just highlighting the same thing. Like I feel like youth American players, well, parents and players don't understand what the environment looks like. Like, let me ask you this question to kind of highlight it. When was the last time somebody skipped training at Dalton State? Just said, I'm not going to training today.
I mean, like just for no, like not, they didn't have class or didn't have a lab.
They just said, I'm not coming to practice today. Like, just, for example, I'll flip it to you this way. We plan practice on 15, 16 kids, and then 9 show up. There's been no message. There's been no communication. Hey, we're not coming. It's just, you do your session plan. You plan out whatever you want to work on for the day. You're planning on 30 guys coming because that's what you're supposed to have. And yet you have 24 because 6 decided not to come. Has that ever happened to you where people just say, I'm not coming to practice today? Or
no, it's things where like, and I'll even explain kind of the system to you. It's things like maybe somebody gets late, like maybe they get out late for a class, like trains at 2:30, but they don't get out until 2:30, so they're not going to be there till 2:45 or whatever. Or maybe on Tuesdays this player has a lab and they can't make it at all. Or we have a Google Doc actually that players put their scheduled stuff in.
So you're aware.
So that we just reference the Google Doc,
right?
When we're planning things and just know like, hey, this player's not going to be there today, so then we can make an adjustment if we need to. But yeah, no, I know what you're saying now. So I remember the early days. It's been 10 years, but yeah, I remember the early days when you might have somebody that just like they just don't turn up to training, and there's not really a reason or whatever. And maybe you find out later like yeah, I just couldn't make it. And it's like, well, why? I'm like, I just couldn't get there. And they're like, it's been a long time since any of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, if people make it that easy for you to write them off, like I'm shocked that they're surprised that then you write them off.
Well, yeah, and that's why I asked you the question because, again, I think this is something that typically happens or is seen at the youth level. People can choose to come and go, and I was actually talking to one of our coaches, and I said I would love to just do what the parents and the players do and just say we're not showing up for 2 weeks. Like there's some, and I'm not even saying directly with one of my teams, but I'm just speaking in general. Like you'll be surprised there'll be kids that don't come for 2 weeks, and then they'll come the next week, all 3 days because there's a game coming up, and they're like, oh, we want to play, and they're like, well, where have you been for the last 2 weeks? Oh, I couldn't come because of X. Oh, but you decided to show up the week before the games, huh? And then if the kid doesn't play, mom and dad go, well, we came to practice. Well, you missed 2 weeks before. So I just think it's all translating or trying to translate to your environment. The reality is and the expectation is it's not the same. And people in this environment in youth soccer can basically get away with murder, for lack of a better term. But when they get to your environment, I think real life kind of punches them in the face. And if somebody decided to skip your practice, you're not going to stand for that. You're probably going to release them at some point very shortly, or at least suspend them or something, I would guess.
So I think a really important point, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think a really important point to mention would be this. I think that there is a mindset in youth players sometimes that, okay, Kyle, you're right, but when I get to that environment, I'm not going to behave the same way. Like I'm going to be there, I'm not going to skip training, et cetera, et cetera. So here's the problem with that. And I'm very consistent. If you watch this whole thing, I always tie things back. I try and say things in a way that's very consistent and is rooted in deep grounding of logic and common sense. So earlier we talked about that gap, right? So if you're going to overcome this gap of playing time and your ability to make an impact when you go from club to college, you can't say, when I get to college, I'm going to stop these bad habits. This is not like a soccer thing. Again, this is a life thing. You're not going to get rid of bad habits when you get to whatever environment. Like very few people can walk onto the pitch and it's like a light bulb and they turn it on and then they can play. When I say very few, I'm talking like very few. Think about the best players in the world. Think about all the videos that you've ever seen about Cristiano Ronaldo talking about his his success, like how much the guy trains and prepares. If Cristiano Ronaldo has to train and prepare, like why wouldn't I have to? I mean, it's really like we can't be so naive. We can't be so naive to say I'm not gonna have the right like preparedness at the level of Kyle, but then when I get to Safe, I'm gonna have the right preparedness. First of all, you're not gonna get to me because Kyle's gonna tell me, and I'm gonna say no thanks then. And then second of all, even if somehow your coach lied to me and said no, never misses training, always in the gym, always eats right, la da 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 da, and then you get here, if you think you're going to turn it on here, you can't. Your gap of preparation already exists because you didn't do the work. You know, if people like it to use this analogy as well, and I'm not a big math fan, I'm not especially good at it, but it's like math. There's so many building blocks in math. Like it just is what it is. Like you can't learn to multiply and divide if you can't add and subtract. So like it's not a matter of like, oh well, you know, how dare you tell me that I can't do it? No, you don't understand. It's not personal. Like you actually can't do it. Like I can't put a roof on a house that doesn't have a foundation. Like I just can't. These are like it just doesn't work. It's not a matter of interpretation. You cannot come into this environment and make an immediate impact if you weren't making an impact at your environment. You can't come to my environment and be prepared if you weren't prepared in your own environment. Like it's just this is just how it is.
Okay, so let me ask you this question because I think this will kind of tie back to where I want to go with this point of conversation now. So, how would you handle this situation if players lied to you about whatever it was, like missing training or whatever? So, and I know that doesn't necessarily happen in your environment, but let me give you this scenario first. This might make sense. So, we had a couple of players within our program. We let them play high school because they all want to play high school. Whatever, go play high school, no problem. We had 2 kids, 3 actually, came up to us and said, hey, we're not going to play high school. We're going to focus on the team and training and blah. We're like, cool. Next thing I know, they don't start coming to practice. And we're like, well, this is weird. We're in the middle of high school season now, and these kids have just disappeared. So lo and behold, we find out that they're all playing high school. And me and one of our guys, one of the other coaches as the director, we go, hey, you guys came to us and you mentioned that you weren't going to play high school and now you're playing high school. And they're like, oh, yeah, our bad, coach. And I'm like, look, what you need to understand what this is, when you make a decision like that, and I was like, what are your guys' goals? Like, oh, we want to go to college, we want to be a pro. I'm like, okay, cool. So imagine if a college coach that is recruiting you called me and asked me for my opinion about you. What do you think I'm going to tell them? Oh, that I'm a good player. You think I'm going to tell them that you're a good player? You just verbatimly lied to me as the director and one of our coaches that you weren't going to do high school. You're going to be at training. I was like, lesson moving forward is we're not going to help you for that. But if you want help, just tell the truth. It's okay. So I would love to get your kind of feedback on that. Like, would you recruit players like that, or how would you handle situations with players that are lying behind your back and things like that?
Well, I mean, everybody makes mistakes. Sure. I think you said there at the end, you said that, hey, just tell the truth.
Right.
If people are going to move forward from there and correct their mistakes, then yeah, I mean, it'd be impossible for me to find a player that didn't make some kind of mistake. I think the question is, like you alluded to, like, are they correcting the mistake? Mm-hmm. So like, if you tell me about that player, based on what you've told me so far, like, I'm not recruiting that player. But if you're like, Saif, this guy went through this, did that, lied about it, and in his defense, came back to us, apologized for it, et cetera, et cetera. He's been on the straight and narrow for the last 8 months. So I think that he's gone through some things. He's shown some accountability to fess up to those things, right. And he's been fine ever since. Like, I think that he's worth a look. So all you're doing is giving me a complete picture, right? Because I don't want to find out later that he had done that and you didn't tell me, because then it discredits my relationship with you. Right. So you're giving me the full picture, but you're also giving me the full picture. You're saying, like, he took accountability and he moved on, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think that, like, that's a completely different story. And I think that accountability and responsibility is like missing in our society like mad. So I like to hear kids that, because everybody makes mistakes. So I'm not super surprised when someone makes a mistake. I'm more interested in, are they willing to take accountability for that mistake and move forward responsibly in a way that demonstrates that accountability and that responsibility. Then I think I've got something. Then now I've got somebody to work with, because that's.
Well, that's interesting, and I appreciate that aspect, because I think that's what you just said is very important. Are they willing to grow from it, and are they willing to take responsibility for the action? And I think a lot of kids won't at this moment take the responsibility, but I think they kind of have to go through those things to learn, so that they have to grow and evaluate themselves from it. I think that's a good impact or good thought. So let me ask you this question as well. I got two left, at least to discuss for today. We can save more for later. But what is your expectation about being in the gym? Is it mandatory for the players? Do they have a schedule they have to go in for Dalton State, or what does the gym work routine look like for them?
Yeah, in the spring and summer, it's mandatory. 3 days a week in their groups in the spring, and in the summer it's usually on their own. Sometimes in groups as well. Depends on where they are. So yeah, I mean it's certainly mandatory there. In the fall, it's not mandatory, but we do enough, strength stuff, let's say, as a team, that they don't need to necessarily be in the gym on their own.
Got it. Cool. And then last question in regards to just playing, how important is transition at the next level in the middle of a game?
Everything. Transition is everything. Transition's going to happen. Transition's going to happen. You're either going to lose the ball, create a chance and it gets saved, create a chance and it go out for a goal kick. Like transition is going to happen. Something's going to happen. The ball's going to go out of bounds. There's going to be a foul. You're going to be attacking, and then you're going to commit a foul, and then it's coming out the other way. Like transition's going to happen. The only time in the game where like you really don't need to be switched on for a transition is when the ball.
You could. I'm sorry. Say that part again.
So the only time you don't really need to be switched on for transition is when the ball goes in the net. So, because the ref usually gives you enough time to get back to half field. That's it. Every other time, like you need to be switched on. How does the ball go in the net? Not super often. Not as often as there are transition moments. So yeah, I mean you definitely need to be prepared for transition. That's a big thing for us. We're super interested in that, and it does separate teams for sure.
Makes total sense. And again, I think that's one of the biggest weaknesses at the youth level is players recognizing the importance of the defending transition and then the flip side, the attacking transition. So that's a fair point, because I've definitely seen when you get to the next level, those are game changers very quickly.
For sure. I don't know what the questions were that came in, but we can get to those too if you want.
Yeah, let's see. Let me scroll and find some of these. So, why would they lie to you? Have you heard their side of the version? Sure, their side of the version, if you really want to know, was that they wanted to play high school, which was okay. I think they know that I don't like high school, but I'm like, I told everybody before the season started for high school, if you want to play high school, it's okay to play high school, no problem. Set limit boundaries to players, which are also to parent indirect, but also setting rules system with both. I would agree as well, Chap. The only difference I think in pay to play is parents think they can do anything because they're paying for it. Keith asked an important. Oh, is it important at what time should you eat if your game is at 8 a.m. and what is an easy morning meal? I don't know if you want to give any advice to that.
That's brutal. If your game's at 8 a.m., that's awful. Yeah, I guess it depends on if you want to eat or not, but you should eat something. Eat some yogurt, eat a bagel, maybe some toast, a banana, an apple. You should definitely eat something. I think that it's really easy to have. One thing that we really like is there's this Nature Valley bar that is, I think like 13 grams of protein in the bar or something like that.
Nice.
Like we for a snack before the game. So I would say something like that. They're pretty easy to find. It's like the brand is Nature Valley, and then the base of the bar is like some type of protein, chocolate protein or peanut butter protein.
Right.
And it will say like on the box in green, like 13 grams of protein or something.
Nice. That's good.
That's probably the easiest thing.
Another question I have here: as a coach for youth sports, why not provide the plan to the parents? Clark, I don't know if you're still in here, but that is a good question. We provide the plan, but that doesn't mean the parents read the plan or remember the plan when it comes game day because they want to scream at their kids. Man. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question. Let's see any other questions. There's something else I saw. I'm trying to scroll through this. Hold on. A lot of people have joined. Just a lot of. Hold on. I know there's something else in there for sure. Question wise. Great points about roster depth. So true. Definitely true. Is there a reason why, on that note about 30 players, why do you carry 30? What's the so people understand what is the value of you carrying more than say 18 or 20 or 22? What's the value of carrying 30 plus?
We want to be able to play 11v11. You know,
Ah.
like whenever we go to tactics, like we've got to be able to execute. You know, it's you want to talk about like a miserable, and I feel for club coaches. Like sometimes they will have, if they're lucky, sometimes they'll have half a field to like run their session. Sometimes they've got like a third of the field to run their session. You know, if let's say you have a whole field, but you can only play 9v9, but you're 17-year-olds and it's 11v11 game. Like believe me, those 4 players is going to make a difference in your ability to execute a game plan. So what to teach it and then execute it. So yeah, I for us, between people, and we're in college, right? So people are going to be late to training sometimes because of class. Sometimes people are going to miss on Tuesday because of a lab. And then you got injured people. So people that maybe are a little bit injured and you're just trying to nurse back to health and you're being precautionary. Maybe it's worse than that. Maybe they're out for a month because of an injury. So like you always want to have the opportunity to play 11v11.
Fair enough. And then what age? Somebody asked, what age do you typically start recruiting?
I mean, it just depends on the context, but for me, probably 16. Like if they're younger than 16, it just depends on how you define recruiting. Even if you're 16, like I'll probably watch your video and maybe get to know you a little bit if I think you're like a good prospect.
Right.
Get a little bit about you and where you're from and what your family's like and stuff like that. Try and establish a relationship. Earlier than that, have I recruited younger than that? Yeah. I mean, I guess technically speaking, yes. Most of those times, like there's some type of connection. Like their brother plays for me, and they've got like a 14-year-old brother who's a freshman in high school. So I don't really consider it recruiting, but like maybe I'll turn up to one of his games and go support the family because I know the family because the older brother plays for me. That type of thing. But usually probably not until 16.
Fair enough. That's all the questions that I found. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but we'll set up another date, 2 weeks. We'll go through. I'll have a bunch more stuff. Actually, there's a guy I want to have come on the live with us. He's one of our coaches, and I think he'd have some good value to add from a question perspective.
Yeah.
His name is Coach Pete Alto. So once I get that sorted with him, I'll figure it out, but we'll get it done. So if you want to shoot me a date that's good next time, we'll figure it out. And I think this is basically invaluable for people that, if they really care about getting to the next level, getting somebody like you in front of them that's at the next level and willing to share their advice and help is tremendous. So I really appreciate your time just for helping people that, are interested. So thank you so much for your time, Saif.
Yeah, thanks again. And yeah, maybe sometime next week before we get back to the full swing spring semester would be good.
Done. You're the man. I'll talk to you later.
And see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.